I studied the history of credit, and I learned 3 key factors of why people borrow money. And because of that study, I committed to a system that helped me eliminate over $65,000 in debt. Hi there, I'm Foluke Olayele with Hand in Hand Consulting. In this video, I'm going to show you something powerful from the history of money and debt. Something that will help you make better, wiser, and more peaceful money decisions. Let's explore the history of credit through both practical and biblical lenses. When most people hear the word credit, they think of credit cards and loans and APR and interest and just borrowing money. But credit existed before modern banks, before credit cards. Credit originally meant trust. The word credit comes from the Latin word credere, which means to believe or to trust. Credere. That just sounds lovely. Trust. Credit started as a relationship before what we now know as a transaction. Ancient markets, in ancient markets, people were exchanging goods and services. Someone would say, I need wheat. Okay, I trust you to pay back the wheat I'm giving you today after the harvest is over. I trust you. That's what credit meant. People kept their promises. They didn't pay with money. They paid with promises, their word. The wicked borrow and do not repay, the Bible says, but the righteous give generously. You can even think of that as the righteous lend generously, right? Because they have a lot to lend and they trust other people to pay them back. So, we're going to talk about when credit turned into debt, what we now know it as right now. Even in the Bible, people had debt. But the interesting thing about the Bible is that when somebody couldn't repay what they owed, when they could not be trusted, because the reality is we humans are not really great predictors of circumstances outside of our control. The weather, other people's actions, government, all of those things. So there were times, even in the ancient days, when people could not repay what they promised to. They couldn't be trusted. And back then there was this sense of dignity that you worked it off. People didn't file for bankruptcy, for instance, and say, yeah, I promised you that, but I'm not going to be able to do it. Instead, what they did is they sold themselves into slavery, indentured servitude, not American slavery, as we are too familiar with, but back then, slavery often was either a result of somebody losing a war or the result of someone not keeping their promises to repay a debt. And in that situation, the dignified right thing to do is to sell yourself and say, I will work off my debt. I will work off this loan. So people did that back in the day. And nowadays, credit has now shifted from I trust you to a bank-centered, business-centered transaction of we will loan you with interest at a cost. That's what credit means now to most people. And eventually it's become the fastest way for people to fall into financial bondage. In the Bible, there's a scene in Proverbs where it says, if you have gotten yourself into financial debt, run like a gazelle. If you've ever seen a gazelle running from a lion, they don't run straight. They run ziggy-zaggy, ziggy-zaggy. They're like, oh no, you are not going to catch me. The Bible challenges us to run with intensity to get out of that debt, because the reality is we don't know what the circumstances will be next week, next month, next year. But we do know that that debt needs to be paid off because we promised to pay it. Now, unfortunately, some people would say fortunately, there are ways, options to get out of paying a debt. Adults, you have to be an adult to fall into debt, right? You give your word, but now there are ways to say, yeah, I know I borrowed that money for my student loan to get, this degree from college or to get this thing, but I'm not going to pay it off. Can't do it. I didn't mean it. You shouldn't have loaned it to me anyway. So for those reasons, and maybe many more, some people say it's out of greed. It could be, I don't know, but for some reasons, likely because people were not necessarily keeping their promises, interest has continued to go up on the credit rates, right? Because people are not paying back when they said that they would. So there are 3 reasons that I do want to go over with you for why people even borrow money. And you may find yourself in one of these 3. When I studied the history of credit, I noticed that the same 3 reasons kept coming up over and over again, back in the olden days and even now today. So here's some of those reasons. One is out of a survival mode. People borrow money because they are in what they consider to be a tight situation out of necessity, whether it's for medical reasons or just because they need to eat. Okay? Necessity means if I don't have the money to buy food or this medical procedure, I will die. My children will die. Something really bad will happen. Okay? It's a crisis. Okay? And in that situation, borrowing bridges the gap between the necessity and the solution. And it's supposed to be a temporary thing. But too often when the crisis is over, when the famine is over, right? And even famine, it's not forever. There has yet to be a famine that's lasted 1,000 years or 100 years. I don't even think there's been one that's lasted more than 10 years. But when the famine is over, the unfortunate thing, when the crisis is over for some people, the unfortunate thing is that they have not built the habit for running gazelle intents to pay off the debt or creating new habits to build a safety blanket. So when crisis happens again, which it will, right, they now have the funds ready to circumvent, to bridge the gap on their own without having to borrow from someone else. Okay, so that's for the first reason, is out of necessity, people borrow money. The second is lifestyle. Okay, so some people would say the first one is understandable. Okay, I don't know if anybody would say the second one is, but out of lifestyle, because they're trying to keep up with the Joneses or the Joneses kids, as people say nowadays, right? This is unfortunately the most common reason why people borrow. Not because it's necessity, but because they want something sooner, something they can't afford today. They're going to borrow from their future so they can pay for it today. They can't afford those shoes today on their current budget and income, so they're going to borrow from their future and wear those shoes today and worry about the payment tomorrow. And in that situation, when they do that, they're thinking, I promise to pay this back, right? But again, they don't know the circumstances of what their life will be in the future. They don't know whether or not they'll still have that job in the future. They're playing a betting game, betting that circumstances as they are will stay the same. And in that case, yes, sure, I'll pay you back. Okay? So that's one other reason why people spend. Sometimes it's out of an emotional need. Some people, it's even an addiction, right? So they're spending today money that they don't have today. Now, the third reason is because they just don't know. They don't know the real cost of the debt, of the money that they're borrowing. Most people don't understand interest. They don't understand compounding of interest, and they don't understand the true cost of borrowing. They also don't read the fine print right? When they borrow money, they often think that that advertised 12% interest is what the bank is actually going to charge, not realizing that the bank is not going to calculate based on simple interest. They may use a discounted method, which, oh, you thought it was 12%, but because we're calculating interest a different way legally, okay, it's actually going to be 16% interest. And by the way, if you miss one payment, that 12% turns into 29% interest, and there's additional fees, right? So people don't keep that in mind. What happens if I don't meet all of the stipulations of this contract that I just signed, this promise that I just made to this institution? I told them they could trust me. I said, credit, you can trust me. I am trustworthy, but then I'm not. So what happens in those situations? People pay for it on the back end. They become stuck because the system profits because they don't know better. Their lack of knowledge and understanding becomes somebody else's profit. Now, I want to share with you how I got out of debt. $65,000. I submitted to a system that I found other people submitted to that worked. And it's all really in the Bible, right? Debt itself is not bad. Just like money is not bad. It's neither good nor evil. But it is about our hearts with it. And when I started making the decision that I wanted to be responsible with money, I wanted to pay off the debts that I actually promised to pay, right? I also became aware of like revolving credit versus installment credit, which people don't even realize. That's the whole another thing about not understanding, is that debt back in the day was installment credit, right? Installment debt. I'm borrowing $20,000 for a car, right? That $20,000, as I pay it down, it's still this $20,000, and then it keeps going down. I can't, let's say I paid down $5,000, so now I owe $15,000. I can't borrow $5,000 on a car loan to buy a fridge or a pair of shoes, because that loan was for something specific. Okay, and I'm going to pay it off in installments for a certain period of time, whether it's 3 years or 5 years, and I think now some car loans are even 7 years. Okay, installment credit versus revolving. Revolving credit is what we're familiar with now with credit cards. You may get a $20,000 credit line, right? You pay down $5,000, and then you see a pair of shoes, a purse, baseball tickets, a concert that you want to go to, and you swipe and you swipe, and you're back to $20,000 in debt again, right? It revolves. It goes down, and then you can spend and goes back up. It goes down, you spend, and it goes back up. That is the debt that we're used to now, and that's the one that I had to realize I don't want that. I actually don't want that. I want to pay all of those debts off and tell those banks, nope, I don't need it to be 20,000. You can put it at 15,000 once I pay that down, and once I got it down to 10,000, you can put it at $10,000 is my max. Once I got it down to 5,000, you need to lower my credit line to 5,000 until it was zero. And then I cut it off. And then I did what so many people don't do. I decided to be my own bank. I started saving money in my own savings account for an emergency, for that necessity. So if I needed something, guess who borrowed from who? I just went to myself and I said, there's an emergency. I'm in the middle of a divorce. My child needs X, Y, and Z for this activity. Who am I going to go to? Myself. I've got the money. I pay for it. And the same with the things that I want. I still get to enjoy life. If I want to go see a play, I love theater. If I want to go see a play or get a massage, I don't need to borrow from a bank or any institution. I go to myself because I saved for it. So that's how I did it. It was not an overnight thing at all. But I did it with discipline, planning, and a decision simply to stop guessing and to use my knowledge and understanding to make wise money choices. So, what can you learn from the history of credit. Whether you're in debt or just managing money without peace. Some people have no debt at all, but they're like, debt is bad. I don't want to get into debt, and I don't know how to use money, and I want to spend, but I can't spend because spending is bad. Both sides. It's about, that pressure that you feel. Here's a few takeaways from the history of credit. Debt is not a necessity. It's simply information. And it's not your destiny either. Okay? It's not your destiny. It's data. You don't need more money. You need more clarity about the money that you have, what's flowing in, and the fact that you're the one who gets to decide what goes out. Borrowing becomes bondage only when there's no plan, right? And keep in mind, there's always risk. So you can only plan so much, but you are not God, and you cannot predict the future, not even your own, let alone government and culture and everything else. The same way you got into debt, you can walk yourself out step by step, one unpurchase at a time. If this video helped you understand why people borrow money and how you can break free, give it a like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs financial peace. And if you want help creating your own plan, start with my free money reset guide. I call it my mini but mighty money reset. It's a 3-day guide to walk you through your thoughts, your emotions, and your decisions about spending. The link is in the description below. I am Foluke Olayele. Today, plan tomorrow.